Today we'll be making a gourmet mushroom risotto. This recipe makes a lot, and so since I'm just making it for my family today, I'm actually going to be cutting the recipe in half. This is one of my favorite recipes that we make throughout this semester. It's a really good recipe, especially if you love mushrooms. We're just mise en placing our ingredients for our mushroom risotto recipe. I have 3 cups of water that I put in the microwave and heated up. I put in 6 teaspoons of chicken bouillon. I have 3 tablespoons of olive oil, 2 tablespoons in one container, 1 tablespoon in another, because our recipe calls for that to be divided. I've already washed our mushrooms really well, and so now we're going to be slicing those. I'll show you. I'm just going to use a chef's knife. You could use any knife that you have available. You could also use an egg slicer. If you had a sharp one, you could use that. Otherwise, we're just going to spend a little bit of time cutting all these mushrooms into nice slices. Mushrooms cut very easily, and this is a very sharp knife, so I'm going to be really careful and not cut my finger today. Notice I'm choking up on the knife. That gives me a little more control. The knife that I'm using is very lightweight also, which is an advantage, but it's also a disadvantage because it moves through things very smoothly. So you have to be very cautious so you don't cut something you don't want to cut. Our recipe calls for 2 shallots or green onions. I do not have any green onions, but I do have an onion that I found in the fridge, so we're going to use that instead. Like we've talked about before, there are many ways to cut onions. Your goal, as in anything you're doing in the kitchen, is to reach the goal that you have. For instance, cutting pieces into the correct size the most efficiently. So in other videos and in class, we've talked about the many ways to chop up onions. But remember, what you're looking for is to be efficient. You want to be efficient in the kitchen. Remember to wrap up our leftover onion pieces or anything else you're putting into the fridge. You're going to wrap it up so that it has a second skin. So you're wrapping it up nice and tightly so that no air can get to it. It doesn't smell in the fridge that way, and it lasts a lot longer. We're going to be using arborio rice for our risotto, which is a typical rice for risotto. Remember, this is a short grain rice. It's a real sticky rice whenever it cooks. It releases a lot of starch. It'll have a sticky, creamy texture that we want in our risotto. Okay, we are going to add our olive oil to our skillet. And then we're going to add our mushrooms. There are quite a bit of those. A pound is quite a bit. I'm going to cook those for about 3 or 4 minutes until they get nice and soft. We're about halfway through cooking now. They've probably been in here, I don't know, 2 or 3 minutes. And you can see that some of the mushrooms are nice and soft, and we're just waiting on them all to get nice and soft before we take this out and save it for just a little bit later on. My mushrooms are almost done. I want them to be al dente, fork tender. I'm going to cook them just a little bit more because they will not really be cooked again before they're eaten. We'll add them back to our risotto at the end, but they won't actually cook much longer. So I'm going to cook them just a couple more minutes, and then I'm going to remove them and their liquid from the heat and pour them into a separate bowl, and then we'll add those back in later on. We're going to put in our 1½ teaspoons, because I'm doing half a recipe, remember, of olive oil, and our onions. Should have been shallots or green onions, but all I had was regular onions. And we're going to cook those for about a minute until they just soften up just a little. Okay, we've cooked those for about a minute or 2. They're starting to look just a touch soft. So now we're going to add our arborio rice. We're going to coat our rice. We are sauteing our rice right now. We're using a pretty hot skillet, adding it to some fat. We saute our rice because we want it to stay a little bit separate in our risotto. So by coating it with oil, that helps keep the starch in and stay a little bit separate. Also, it adds really good flavor to our dish. So we're going to do this for a couple minutes. Now that our rice is kind of a pale golden color, it smells like popcorn. We're going to add our 1/4 cup of wine, dry white wine. If we were at school, we would be using chicken broth instead of wine. And then we're going to cook that until it is all absorbed by the rice. Okay, we didn't have to cook that very long till it was fully absorbed. And then we're going to be adding our chicken stock, our liquid, just about 1/2 cup at a time. And each time we do that, we're going to wait until the rice fully absorbs the liquid before adding more liquid to it. And this whole process is going to take a good 15 to 20 minutes. As you can see, we're almost ready to add a little more chicken stock, but we're just waiting on that rice to absorb just the remainder of that liquid before we add any more. We want the rice to slowly absorb the liquid. We want it to give up that starch and release that starch really slowly. This will help to give our rice, therefore our risotto, a really creamy, nice, smooth texture that we really want. Another batch of liquid, and we're just going to keep stirring and just kind of wait until the rice absorbs it, and then we will just keep doing that for the next 15 to 20 minutes. Our risotto, when we're finished, is going to have such a nice creamy texture. It's almost going to look like you added some heavy whipping cream or some whole milk to it. It's going to be that creamy, although this recipe doesn't have any cream or milk or anything in it. Okay, time to add some more liquid. This is one of the most common ways of cooking rice in Italy. Lots of times risotto is thought of as being at a fussy high-end restaurant, mostly because arborio rice is fairly expensive, and more than that, it's very time-consuming to cook. We have a restaurant in Ankeny, I better not mention the name, but we have a restaurant that if you want risotto as an appetizer, as a side dish, you can call ahead because they want to allow about 45 minutes to get it ready for you. Making risotto is really more of a technique than a dish. Once you get a feel for the basic steps like sauteing and toasting the rice and adding the liquid just a little bit at a time, you can make all kinds of fun risotto. This one will have a lot of mushrooms in it, but if you don't like mushrooms, lots of times we put zucchini and dried tomatoes in it, or you can put spinach in it. You can put all kinds of fun stuff in it according to whatever you or your family likes once you get the basic techniques down. Risotto is usually made with arborio rice. If you have your choice, you can also make it with carnaroli rice. That rice is a little more expensive yet, but kind of fun to experiment with if you have the opportunity. It has a little more reliable for the texture, a little harder to overcook. So a little different texture, a little harder to overcook, a little more reliable for restaurants, especially if they're not paying quite as much attention as we're paying with it today. But it is a little more expensive and a little harder to find. So risotto is probably the rice of choice for most of us. Looks like it's time to add a little more liquid, and we have about one more time to do that. And then we'll see where we are as far as it being done. last batch of chicken stock and wait on our rice to absorb that. Okay, it's getting there. It's working on absorbing that last little bit of liquid. Other things that you could add into risotto if you didn't like mushrooms. Sometimes we've added like a turkey breakfast sausage or a sausage that's already been cooked and drained. That's really good. If you like caramelized onions, those can go in there, and that's really good towards the end. If you like Swiss chard, you can roll some Swiss chard up and chiffonade some Swiss chard and put ribbons of Swiss chard in there, and it's really good. Really, the world's the limit. You can add just about anything you like to risotto and make it an entirely different dish. So we're just waiting on our rice to absorb the last of the liquid, and then we're going to have to determine if our risotto is done or not. We're going to do that by looking with our eyes and tasting with our mouth. We want to see our rice absorb the liquid. We want it to be nice and creamy, but not super thick. Whenever we bite into it, we want the rice to be mostly soft and it to have a really good soft texture and flavor. Okay, so we're seeing that creamy texture now. Let's taste it and make sure it's mostly soft. Yes, that tastes really good. Okay, we removed our risotto from the heat. We're now going to add back in our mushrooms with the liquid from the mushrooms. We're going to add our chives, our butter, which will melt, and our Parmesan cheese. We're also going to add just a little bit of salt and pepper. Stir that up until our butter melts and everything's nicely stirred together. Okay, our risotto looks wonderful. If possible, this dish was really meant to be served immediately. The longer it stands, the more the starch is set, and then it loses just a little bit of its creaminess. However, I have put leftovers in the fridge and warmed them up the next day, and they are still delicious.